Hello, this is Janet from janetsandberg.com, and you're listening to the Phoenix Wisdom Podcast, the weekly show that talks to peers and professionals who open up about their darkest moments when they felt like ending it all, why they didn't, and how they transformed their lives in order to triumph over the darkness and despair. Please remember to subscribe if you'd like to hear more inspiring stories. Hello, and welcome back to the Phoenix Wisdom Podcast. Today we are here with Amy Boelter. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but we'll let her introduce herself and say her name the proper way if I mispronounced it.
No, you got it. I'm Amy Boelter, and I'm a mom to one 3-year-old. I'm married. I work a corporate job, and I also help people with their health. And I live just outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here today and being willing to share your story and help our listeners feel less alone in the world with everything that they are going through, because I think that's the biggest thing for a lot of us. I was talking to somebody just recently about how we sort of get into this terrible cycle where we don't want to burden people with what we're going through. So we don't tell them, but then they can't help us because we're not telling them. And it just sort of keeps going because we're so good at faking it most of the time and passing for well-adjusted people, even though we're not. And yeah, like we so desperately want somebody to know what we're going through, but we're so afraid that they won't understand, or just that we don't want to burden them. So yeah, this is kind of why I started the podcast, is so that if we don't want to burden those close to us, we can at least listen to other people's stories and know that when we're going through this stuff, that we're not alone, because there's loads and loads of us that have been there and survived and gotten to some pretty good places in life. So let's start with your story, Amy. Where were you? What was going on when you were at your lowest low, when you thought that maybe you wouldn't or shouldn't be here anymore?
So for me, that culminated about 5 to 6 years ago, like 2017, 2018. I had sort of I sort of struggled with like anxiety and depression a lot of my teenage years, but it seemed manageable, and I was playing sports, and I had things that managed it for me. And then 2017, I moved across the country. So I'm going through a big adjustment there.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to have a baby. We're going through infertility. And then I was really close to my dad's dad, and he passed away. And I was fortunate enough that I worked in mental health for 15 years. So I knew I needed some grief therapy, but that opened a whole world of like childhood
Mm-hmm.
trauma and all these other things that I hadn't dealt with. And then going through infertility and all of that, it just really culminated. And I started drinking more, which is always not a great idea. It's like,
Right.
let's take gasoline and throw it on the fire. But it seemed like a coping mechanism at the
Seemed
time.
like a good idea at the time.
Like, it was like, well, I'm so miserable. I can get to, 6 o'clock and have some drinks. And that obviously like doesn't help the infertility or any of that.
Mm-hmm.
I just remember sitting there like day after day, and I had, from the outside, I had a really good life. I'm a newlywed. We just moved into a house. We're by our in-laws. We have pets, and yeah, we're not getting pregnant right now, but people who haven't walked that journey too, they kind of go, well, you get more time with your spouse, enjoy it. And you're like, I just want a baby. Like,
Yeah.
um, so
Yeah.
from the outside, it looked really, really good to people, but I would sit there on my couch and just like cry every night. And, um, I just remember thinking, is this my life? Like, am I going to be one of these people that stays down forever? Like, what do I do? I need meds. Like, I had no idea where to start, even though I had worked in mental health for 15 years. I had no idea where to start that journey for myself.
Yeah. It's a lot different than when you're in it than when you're looking at other people or helping other people with their story. You have a lot more objectivity when you're helping somebody else, because you can sort of pick out those little bits that are maybe more important and be like, let's start here. But when you're in it, it's all just equally bad.
Yeah.
You're just like, I don't even know where to start or what to do. So, and yeah, that is a lot to be going through, uplifting yourself and moving your whole life across the country, and um, infertility, which is huge, and just so much all at once. And the grief alone
Yeah.
is, is any one of those three things alone is a lot to deal with. But yeah, that is a lot. So where did you start? What did you end up doing?
It was a really just kind of throw things at the wall and see what sticks for myself kind of process. And I will say that it actually kind of got worse before it got better for me. So
Mm-hmm.
I initially started with some therapy, but then, like I said, like that stirred up all this trauma, and then you're dealing with trauma on top of depression, and so that really kicked up just some, thoughts of not wanting to be here for me. I had kind of thought out some plans, but then I also knew I didn't want my husband to go through that because we had lost a friend to suicide, and I just knew
Mm,
how devastating that was.
yeah.
Um, I tried to get back into exercise, but honestly, I could barely get out of bed. So I joined a
Right.
CrossFit gym and paid way too much money for something I didn't use. um, but I I kind of got to this point where it was like, okay, just keep taking a step, right? And so I got to a point where for me, it just was like, do one thing to take care of yourself every day. It doesn't have to be like, huge, but it was like, make sure you get your shower today. Or like, if you don't get your shower, make sure you're eating today. And I started slowly just doing something for myself each day that was good and was healthy. And then um, we did end up getting pregnant. And that kind of turned things around. But then when I said like it gets worse before it gets better, then I hit postpartum after that. So
Oh
that
my
was a really
goodness.
good period. And then I went into like postpartum and started drinking even more again after I was done breastfeeding. And it just was like, okay, at this point I have a child, so I really have to get serious. So I actually ended up going on medication then. And it was like smack dab in the middle of the pandemic. So I saw someone virtually.
Oh my
But
goodness.
I will say for me, like that medication, it gave me clarity. Like
Mm-hmm.
I had I had not been on it, right? Like I was trying therapy and these other things. And for me, at that point, getting that medication probably saved my life.
Yeah. Yeah. That was for me too. I tried for so long and so hard to avoid the meds, which I had tried, probably 10 years earlier, and I didn't like them. But there's a lot of science goes into pharmaceuticals. So like a 10-year gap, I'm like, oh, this is a totally different thing now. But yeah, you sort of get to that crisis point where you're like, okay, it's meds and my life, or it's not,
Yeah. I mean,
um
I really felt
so
like I was at a point where it was like, I don't want to die, but like I wanted to die. And so it's like, I knew I couldn't do that till like my daughter was like a year and a half old. And I'm like, all right, we have to do something big here. And it started there, and like, I think what I would say to anyone is like, just start with one thing. It doesn't have to be everything. I think
Mhm.
people see people doing well and they're like, oh, they work out and they do this and they do this, but it didn't start like, I don't think any of us started there. None of us started with doing it.
No. Yeah, you start with one little thing, like, let's move from the bed to the couch today.
Yeah.
Like, let's have a shower today. Let's eat one healthy thing today. Let's have an apple, or um and yeah, it doesn't have to be all of those things. You don't have to move from the bed to the couch and have a shower and have an apple all in one day, like to start off with. Like, because even that, like, it is a lot
Yep.
on the bad days. So, and maybe let's try to not have a drink today, or have half as much as you would have. Like, just start cutting back if,
Yeah.
if, or if it's weed or whatever your escape is,
Yeah.
just have a little bit less to
Yeah.
start with.
Well, and for me,
Yeah,
going
I
on
love that.
the meds is what got me off of drinking because I knew, obviously having worked in that field for a long time, I knew that like the meds don't mix with alcohol. So for me, I'm like,
Yes.
why would I take something to help me while I'm equally taking something to ruin that? So that, that one little thing or not so little thing is starting the meds because it's a big thing.
Hmm.
Um,
It's a big
that led
decision.
to, okay, now I'm going to cut back on drinking. Cutting back on drinking meant, okay, now I can get up in the morning and have some intentional time for myself and journal. And then, oh, okay, I'm up early anyway, and I have nothing really to do. Let's go do like a 10-minute workout downstairs, right? So it's just like it all kind of starts to build on it, but it's like blocks. It's taking one and putting it on top of the next.
Yeah. And yeah, and the same with working out. You can just do 10 minutes. You don't have to do a full half hour or um so I'm originally from Canada, and we used to have this show on TV when I was little, um probably on our equivalent of PBS or something, and it was called the 20-minute workout. And it's the ladies in their leotards and leg warmers, and it was pretty, even at the time, was pretty awful. But their point was, you could take that half hour block, because of course there's commercials, um, and just do that. And that's good for the day. And it doesn't have to be, a full hour at CrossFit.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
you can do it in your living room. You can just, do some jumping jacks and do whatever, or, whatever feels good to you. Do some yoga, whatever it is for you that day.
And you can
Um,
start a workout and then go, this isn't for me today. I tried to honor my body
yeah,
and I just don't have the energy and this isn't working, but I attempted it. And then, I think the more you do that, you like build trust with yourself. So you're like, okay, I don't, I think dropping that veil of perfectionism sometimes too really helps with just understanding that we're human. We give so much grace oftentimes to others. Like we're so willing
absolutely.
to be so kind to the neighbor or the friend who's struggling, but like we'll tell ourselves we have to get everything right. And I think sometimes when we peel that off, it just helps us. It just helps us understand that like we're a human and we're allowed to falter and but that's hard. That's like a learned thing too.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so important to just, yeah, do a little bit, be okay with just doing a little bit, be okay with trying, be okay with allowing yourself to be like, this isn't for me today. And, even if you've said, I'm going to work out for 10 minutes, like you said, and maybe 10 minutes isn't in your capacity once you get started, you're like, ooh, no, 3 is good today. And yeah, just allowing yourself that grace and that forgiveness to just do whatever you can.
Yeah.
So I love that. I love that. Just starting slow. And where are you now? What's life like a few years later?
Yeah. So my daughter's 3 now. So like a year and we're about a year and a half, a little bit longer into all this. But one of the things I found for me is I really had to create like a solid set routine. So like I talked about this led to this, led to this. And now it's like I have this really nice self time in the morning and it never looks the same. Like I don't journal every day. I don't get to the gym every day, but I try and be very intentional with the things I do.
Hmm.
Um I also in just because my background's in mental health, I feel like when we walk through tough things, it's kind of our job to reach back and pull others out of the fire.
I
Um
love that. Yes.
yeah, so I'm back in school right now for a health coaching cert. Because I found a lot of holistic things to really be helpful to me. I do homeopathy. I eat in a very like nutritious way. And so now I'm kind of at that point where it's like I'm pretty well managed. I can really pick up if I start to take a couple, you start to feel those like 3 or 4 days in a row and you're like, oh, I'm not heading in a good direction. What's going on here? I'm pretty good at picking that up and like readjusting and like recalibrating now. Um, we moved homes. We have a really beautiful home. Our old home held a lot of like just bad memories for me, like with
Mm-hmm.
pregnancy loss and things like that. So that's been really
Yeah.
good. And we live by a walking trail that I walk like 4 seasons of the year. Um, but just really being mindful and managing things, I would say, is where things are at. Just staying on top of it, staying aware.
Good. Yeah. Super important.
Mhm.
And yeah, like you said, with the food, especially, like that's kind of one of the first things that I notice as well. Like if I'm suddenly not making an effort, or not really suddenly, but I notice it suddenly,
Yeah.
I'm not making an effort to eat the good things, where I'm just grabbing a box of crackers or having a bowl of cereal or doing the easy foods. And I'm like, there's more going, like what's going on that I'm not putting the effort in. Why am I feeling um you know low, or just it's the external stuff that
Mhm.
is sort of the clue to what's going on internally.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because like we lost our dog, our 13-year-old dog this year, and like some people are like, well, that's a pet, but to me, like that was my baby before my baby, and I had her before
Yeah.
I knew my husband, and I made it through that grief cycle much better. But I think we learn tools along the way, and it's so important to like keep our tools sharp, keep our toolbox handy. I think we do ourselves a disservice if we ever go, I'm past this, and that can never happen to me again. I can never fall back down again. So I think staying vigilant is so important. And like you talked about, okay, I'm eating this way, or but I find that for myself too. Like if I start kind of slack at work, or like these little things, they become the big things. So I just try and stay really aware of all that.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that has come up in the conversations that I'm having on the podcast are that sort of once we've been there to that really low spot where we've considered that we don't want to be here anymore, it comes back that much easier. Like
Mhm.
it takes us a long time to get to that place the first time,
Yep.
but then sort of on our healing journey, as we're climbing our way back out of that pit, it's easier to fall back down. So
Mhm.
it doesn't take as much to sort of knock us back down to that place. So being really vigilant helps us catch ourselves before we get all the way back down there again.
Yeah, it's so true. It's like one of those ones where, like I said, like I kind of have to watch it because like 3, 4 days, I can start to really notice a downward trend. And I tell my husband now, I was like, what took me years to get to before, I could probably get there in like a week or two if I wasn't taking care of myself. Like I just know that now. And even as women, I think I have PCOS. So like around my cycle, my
Same.
my mood just like it just goes everywhere. And I noticed that even on my cycle, I'm like, why am I feeling this way? And then I'm like, oh, okay, this is what's going on. But I have to even stay aware of like that for myself, like my cycle and how that's affecting things.
Yeah. Yeah. I do that. I also have PCOS, and it affects everybody in a different way. For those of you listening who don't know what it is, it's polycystic ovarian syndrome.
Mhm.
Um, and because it's a syndrome, there's like a gazillion different symptoms, and everybody has a different concoction of them, and it affects everybody differently. Um, but not so much anymore as I get older, I guess, because my hormones are doing different things instead. But I used to be really moody, and I get really snappy, and I was just like, oh my God, like I would forget that, there's something wrong with me. And I'd just be like, why am I so moody all the time? And I'm like, oh yeah, because I have a permanent hormone imbalance. I'm like constantly PMSing, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
So
a wild ride. And like you couple that in with like going through anything
yeah.
mental wise, like, it can just throw you into a tailspin so quickly. So it's just, even for that, it's like when we talk about nutrition, like I've stayed so vigilant to my nutrition just for like managing that. And PCOS usually comes with depression and anxiety. So
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So good uh tip, I guess, for our female followers. Even if you don't have PCOS and your hormones aren't like super wild, just regular, monthly hormone fluctuations can just like what works for you one week isn't going to work for you the next week. And that in itself can be super frustrating, but that could be why, if you're like, but this was working last week. Why isn't it having the same effect this week? Well, because you're a different person this week and you'll be a different person again next week.
Yeah, and that's like so I haven't started the book yet, but I'm going to read this book, Wild Power. And one of the things it talks about a lot in there is just for women, we're very cyclical beings, and our world is designed really in this like 24-hour cutoff kind of way. And that's not really always what's best for us because of like our hormonal cycles and stuff. So of course there's circadian rhythm and you want to get your sleep and all those things, but also like living in this rigid structure sometimes is really bad. So just figuring out how to make that. I mean, we can't quit it, right? Like we can't
Yeah.
necessarily change it, but like making it work for you, and building in those times to take care of yourself. And also for like moms, I mean, you look at anywhere on the internet and they tell you you're selfish as a mom to take care of yourself first. But like for just people, moms who are listening, like if you don't take care of yourself, you will end up in this dark place again. And then like, how are you taking care of your kids then? Like when you're kind of in your bed for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So like I would argue it's more selfless to take care of yourself and make sure like you're taking your meds, you're getting your walk in, the things you need to be there and be there for your kids.
Yes. Yeah. And I look back now and I don't know how, because I was a single mom for my kids when they were like 10 and 12 up until now, and they're 21 and 23. And I'm just like, through their teenage years, I'm like, how did that happen? Because I was so not there, like mentally and emotionally a lot of the time. Like, I have no idea. Like, and I think it's worse than it was. I just feel like I spent my whole time on the couch feeling terrible and contemplating, not being here many, many times. Um, and I guess I did a pretty decent job of hiding it and being functional when the kids were around. I guess I did a lot of that maybe when they were at school and pulled myself together when they got home, so they didn't really notice it. But yeah, like, and going back to doing what you can, do what you can when you can. Rest and take care of yourself when the kids aren't there so that you can be there for them when they are there.
Mhm.
So, and when they're little, they're, and they're home all the time. It's a lot harder, but just, yeah, make some time to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Do you have any last words of wisdom for our listeners?
I would just say really do your best to be introspective. And if you feel like something's not working for you, feel okay to walk away from it. Like I sat in a job for a long time that it wasn't working for me. It was not good for my mental health. And I know it's easier said than done, especially when there's money and there's paychecks and things like that involved. But I think, man, I look back and when I was in that job, I was in a position where it's like, I won't make this much money if I go anywhere else. But I was like crying every day on the way home. I lived in Florida at the time. I drove over a bay every day. And I don't know if I can say this or if this is something,
Yeah, you
but
can say anything you want.
I would think about driving my car off that bridge every single day because I just hated that job so much. I didn't hate my husband. I didn't hate my home. I didn't hate my pets. That job made me so miserable. And if you have anything like that in your life, just understand you can walk away. You can walk away from people. Like if they're,
Yes.
you don't have to keep family in your life. You don't have to keep friends in your life. Like while you're healing and while you're getting yourself well, you can walk away from anything that doesn't serve you. And don't be afraid to do that.
Yes. Yes. I love that. And yeah, no job is worth contemplating driving off of a bridge every day. Like,
Yeah.
no amount of money is worth that.
No. And it wasn't even really good money. It's just like I was young, so it was like good money for being young. But it was
Right. Well,
like I
it's
look
all
back now,
it's
I'm
all
like, why
relative.
did I yeah,
All
yeah.
relative. What, but anyways, I will let you get back to your little one. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and share your story with us today. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. Remember that you are loved, you are worthy, you are valuable, you are meant for more, and that it really does get better. If you are in crisis, there are numbers that you can call or text to get the help that you need. That information for Canada and the US is in the description below each episode. If you are in immediate crisis, please call 911. We love you, and I hope you'll listen again.